Well, a THI normal show is back after a 3-week absence. As we dance through the ambience of life and spiral across the planet. Do we ever do a normal show? One wonders. This is the Truth, Honour and Integrity Show. My name's Thomas Williams. Enjoy the show. Right, let's get into the show. Some ponderings. This is to do more with the blueprint, but it will be mentioned again next week. Upon attaining the flow, given now there's an extra week between the blueprint reports and the show due to my absence recently. And this gives us time to then iron out and then roll out the next phase and a structured move time, the migration from MeWe over to the blueprint site. Now, first migration will be the new Blueprint for Humanity group and chat on the MeWe, although some of the law and the youth group has already started to unfold, I've been told. And so all reports, notes, agendas to be moved over to the Blueprint site by February 29th or sooner. And this will allow you all a chance to get used to the new site. This will allow the web team to iron out any potential issues arising from the site. And once that is achieved, and hopefully by the 29th, the new Blueprint for Humanity chat, the MeWe page, can be closed down on March the 1st. And if that all works well, then the women's group page can be migrated quicker, say by March 15th. And then March 16th, we'll start the process of moving the law MeWe group over to the Blueprint site as well. Now, the main MeWe page will remain open, including the main chat, whilst the teams transferred over are adjusting and the web team have dealt with any or all issues that have arisen. And then we will look at how to eliminate the MeWe chat, but perhaps keep the page open for personal chats and postings. We don't need to have personal chats on the Blueprint site. The Blueprint site is a working group and personal chats will add to the cost of the data used on there. Now, there are some, which is an understatement, major positive pieces and internal processes going on now that is beyond the scope of most people to connect the dots together. And this particular show will go to some way to showing that, and some serious changes are now underway on a global scale. Take note of Tucker Carlson in Russia, a seismic move and supported by Elon Musk. And remember, both have received the Blueprint books recently. Is it connected? I guess time will tell. So we're going into the news section and the further erosion of the so-called superpower country called America, as Biden is facing criticism after a bombshell report revealed that all federal agencies are less than 50% occupied, wasting billions in taxpayer dollars over a year after he declared the COVID-19 pandemic over. And according to the Government Accountability Office memo to Senator Joni Ernst, not a single federal agency has over half of its workforce in the office. And that's a staggering statistic, since federal agencies spend about $2 billion of the taxpayer dollars per year to operate and maintain federal office buildings, and over $5 billion annually in leases. Criminal wastage and spending for the sake of it has hampered all governments in this country since at least 1871. And no one seems to have a single clue how to deal with it. Well, the Blueprint model does address this problem and eliminates it entirely. So money can be spent in better ways serving the people of this country and not shekel makers of this and other countries. Here's a pondering of mine. I've had many ponderings recently. Don't panic. Based upon observational experiences, you will notice that the internet has slowed down within the past 12 months. Pages taking longer to load. But why? The simple answer is advertisements. And given the globalists all make large sums of money doing advertisements of varying kinds, the question then remains is, how much energy would the planet save if we banned adverts altogether? Think of the electricity it would save. It would help the global warming and cooling, help the environment, save the trees, enhance the ecosystem, free up airspace and magazines for more intelligent and informing based information, and remove hundreds of thousands of parasites around the world. And so, what is there not to like about that? And surely the United Nations and World Health Authority will see the benefits this solution would bring. A scientist who believed humans would die from the climate crisis has made a dramatic U-turn and now believes the issue may have been overblown. Well, I never. But Hannah Ritchie, who is a data scientist at the University of Oxford, claims that doomsday warnings of floods, widespread famine and deaths from disasters are overshadowing the progress that has been quietly made in recent years. And she pointed out how emissions per person peaked in 2012. Well, I never again. And remained the same since. Along with the notion that organic food is not more climate friendly and that the dreaded 2.7 Fahrenheit of warming is not a tipping point into oblivion. Now, Ritchie, who published the book Not the End of the World, recently shared the 7 key points that led her to change her position on the climate crisis. The over-exaggeration is what seems to have led Ritchie to do a 180 on the issue, finding it has distracted us with small issues. That's the second, third or fourth time this past week I've seen someone reference the term often used here, in fact we had it in the blueprint, of doing a 180. I guess the THI-based collective consciousness is still in full flow. But Ritchie highlighted a survey in 2021 which found 6 in 10 people worldwide believed eating a locally produced diet, including meat and dairy products, is a better way to reduce an individual's greenhouse gas emissions. However, the scientists debunked that idea with the Fhstos food miles, which is the travelling of the food to get to the people's tables, fridges or pantries, accounted for only 5% of global emissions attributed to the food industry. Now, the global carbon projected estimated that carbon emissions rose about 1% in 2023, but the amount is much slower compared to the 1990s and early 2000s. And she explained that emissions have been reaching a long plateau in the last 5 to 10 years, suggesting the world is heading to its peak. Well, it appeared to peak in 2012 because it hasn't changed. And many nations have made a historic pledge to limit global warming to 2.7 Fahrenheit, but data has suggested that we are sure to pass it as early as 2030. Now, the warming target has been perceived as a threshold, and once past we enter a time of environmental catastrophe. But this isn't true, Ritchie shared. It isn't true, and we will not be reaching the 2.7 Fahrenheit by 2030 either, as true data suggests the planet is actually cooling, not warming. And this is reflected in their own terminology by replacing the global warming with climate change. And more of their fear-based programs are now breaking down as the truth is beginning to prevail. And I guess reality is starting to bite for the so-called elites, as things we warned of near 8 years ago to some of them is now coming home to roost. The solution to their and our issues and problems is the blueprint. Period. But world leaders recently went to Davos to pontificate on the planet's most pressing problems. 2 major wars, a shipping crisis, cyber attacks on state institutions, and yet more alarming evidence of the climate emergency means there is no short of talking points. But turning ideas into action when governments owe an unprecedented $88.1 trillion. And according to them, it is the equivalent almost to the world's annual economic output. And it'll be hard to face up to it. Which is interesting on a side note, this will not be in the transcript, because the GDP was 123 trillion. Why are they saying now it's the equivalent to almost the GDP? So that's a quarter of the world's GDP gone, when the money in circulation is only 40 to 60 trillion, which is half. Now, public debt exploded during the pandemic, and new borrowing this year is likely to break records in several big economies, leaving governments less able to respond to shocks such as financial meltdowns, pandemics or wars, all of which is created by the shekel people and bankers. And even in the absence of a new crisis, soaring debt servicing costs will constrain efforts to tackle climate change and care for ageing populations. Turning in, since when have they cared for anybody? And public services in many countries are already strained after successive budget cuts. More worrying still, as the debt burdens grow, governments could find themselves unable to borrow more to service existing obligations and fund basic services adequately. And they said a government unable to finance its debt would be forced to implement abrupt and painful spending cuts or tax hikes, said Michael Saunders, a former member of the Bank of England's Monetary Policy Committee. No, we just stopped sending stolen money to the likes of the Crown Bank of England and the Federal Reserve scamming system, because that then stops the harvesting of the people and the planet, and we can spend more money on the people and services. But such a government may lack the fiscal space to respond to future adverse shocks, preventing fiscal support when it's most needed, he said to CNN, Clown News Network. And it's all collapsing around them, just as we forecasted, and they need to stop putting band-aids over the dam and reverse the flow. And that takes courage on their part, but it will be and is essential for us all to move forward. The real purpose for the fake war in Gaza is now coming to light, it seems. And again, it's something we at THI revealed some time back. Israel, Egypt and the United States would work together on ways to secure the porous border between Egypt and Gaza, something that would involve solving the problem of tunnels once and for all. Isn't it ironic the US won't deal with their own borders but will for Israel? Says it all, really. But the plan envisages a major role for foreign players, the US, plus European and Arab governments, in the creation of a multinational task force with responsibility for what's euphemistically called the rehabilitation of the Gaza Strip. The rehabilitation needs to happen in Israel, not in other places. Now, it's ironic, to me anyway, as I stated that a UN peacekeeping force should have been in Gaza and the West Bank as far back as the early 1980s. But then the UN are not peacekeepers at all, as we have subsequently found out. But multinational forces needs to be from countries not connected to the whole charade either. So no American, British, Indian or Saudi forces, otherwise it is a control force. And of course Israel will request those as A, they are favourable to them, and B, those selected will ultimately have to pay for it, in classic Israeli style. And so the report says, in other words, those countries will be expected to put the whole shattered area back together and pay for it. Well, I never. And the US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, who's on his latest visit to the region, and his fourth since October the 7th, as he travels from one Arab capital to another, how much enthusiasm is he likely to encounter from leaders who are appalled at the scenes of suffering inflicted on Gaza? And more to the point is, why should they trust a Zionist operating as a US Secretary of State? It's like dealing with Netanyahu. But writing for the British think tank group Chatham House, Dr. Sanem Vakil and Dr. Neil Quilliam urge Arab governments not to wait. Without serious regional planning and investment in Gaza, they write, a potential outcome that could materialise is lawlessness and a Palestinian political vacuum alongside the grim reality of famine, disease and death. Again, ironic, given it's these think tanks who create these very situations. And now they are concerned of what happens next. It's lunatic asylum thinking again. Why didn't they think of that before launching these programs? And what of that Palestinian political vacuum? But according to media reports, all appointments to local committees would have to be approved by Israel. So there's no role for Hamas, but also for now, at least, for the Palestinian Authority either, which is based in the West Bank and its president Mahmoud Abbas. He also said it would be hard for the US to get Arab partners to agree to work with Israel, when some members of Netanyahu's government were openly calling for Palestinians to be resettled outside of Gaza. And in recent days, those fears have been stoked by reports that the government has been conducting secret negotiations with African countries to accept migrants from Gaza. They're not migrants. See how they changed the terminology? And yet again, probably for the third or fourth time already in this show, and we're less than half an hour in. Well, I never. They are moving all of the Palestinians out of the area altogether. Now, where have we heard that before? Next stop, moving the Jews themselves on. Don't believe me? Just watch it unfold. There's some interesting developments taking place in Poland also, although one must also be wary of faction games as well. Because outside Poland's main evening news studio, there is a row of police stationed for protection. And the entire building of the public broadcaster TVP is now surrounded by metal barriers and more police officers. And the reason is there's a battle over control of the airwaves there, which is dramatic in itself. But it's also part of a much broader power struggle that began when elections last autumn ended 8 years of populist rule. Now, the TVP news presenter Zbigniew Luzinski said it's all been quite stressful and crazy, and admits as he heads past the police to go on air with a bundle of scripts in one hand. But our mission, he said, is very important to us, to tell the truth and be objective, if only. And when Donald Tusk ran for election late last year, his coalition had promised to restore balance to the media and stop funding a factory of lies and hatred. Now, we had a plan for that here in 2018. But some people would not follow through with it, describing it as too radical. But there's nothing more radical than the current system of lies, distraction and distortion of truth here in America. Now, under the previous right-wing government, public TV and radio channels have become fiercely partisan, just like America, and some say dangerously so. And so in December, the new culture minister sacked the TVP top management and the 24 hours news channel was knocked off air. And the backlash was immediate, as senior opposition figures denounced an illegal takeover and then laid siege to the TVP offices. And they overwhelmed security to burst into the lobby and stage a sit-in. A rival management team later entered the main news building in the city centre, and many of the chants were crude and fiercely anti-Donald Tusk, portraying the Prime Minister as a traitor and a supposed German agent, hence the potential for it to be faction-based. And they say that they're the kind of slurs state TV has been pumping out for years in Poland, and a reminder of why the government moved so quickly to shut it down. They're also a reminder of how polarised Poland has become, and many protesters carried portraits of 2 former MPs who were imprisoned this month for abuse of power. And the men are now paraded as heroic political prisoners by PiS supporters and are openly backed by Poland's President Andrzej Duda. And so Poland is in the crosshairs currently, as they are dancing too much to the tune of NATO against their friends and brethren, the Russians and Belarus. And one hopes the split with the factions allows the people themselves to step up and take back their country and chart a better path. Here is another major sign of the changing in thinking and also taking actions. And that is encouragingly increasing rapidly now, highlighting the problem, changes the energy field around it, and then weakens it. But the US Representative Scott Perry is joined by Representatives Tom Tiffany, Paul Gosar, Diana Harshbarger, and the Ogles and Matt Rosendale to introduce the Defund Davos Act. What an extraordinary moment that is. Politicians going against the elites. Now, the bill would prohibit the Department of State and the United States Agency for International Development from providing any funding also to the World Economic Forum. I hope you realise how major that is. And for me, now we are talking and getting it, and people are beginning to see who the problems are and acting upon it. And this is increasing the possibility of the blueprint becoming acceptable, because it was riddled right through it about shutting down these agencies, World Economic Forums, World Horror Organisations, UN, etc., etc., as well as these secret society groups. But Perry said forcing American taxpayers to fund annual ski trips for insular global elitists is absurd, not to mention reprehensible. And the World Economic Forum doesn't deserve 1 cent of American funding, and it's past time we defund Davos as well. And that should be music to all our ears. Now, hosted in Davos, Switzerland, Rothschild Centre, and also CIA, the World Economics Forum annual conference brings together CEOs, so-called world leaders and other officials to discuss elitist, dystopian ideas like global solidarity and eating bugs to solve world hunger. And throughout the years, the US has spent millions to fund the forum and its anti-American conference. And the wealthy World Economic Forum globalists should not receive Americans' hard-earned tax dollars, said the representative Tiffany. Hear, hear. And the Defund Davos Act would ensure that the US tax dollars are not funding the World Economic Forum and their reset on our way of life. And she said, I thank Congressman Perry for leading this important effort. Now, the Davos conference allows the global elites and leaders of countries like China and Iran, she said, to argue against the interests of the American people and devise means by which global governance can be implemented. And the forum's objectives include designing and implementing a global financial system, getting countries to enforce electric vehicle purchases and car sharing, using artificial intelligence to drive the economy and society and other global public interests. It's just a pity she mentioned China and Iran are part of the problem. Eventually all will learn no country is the problem. None. Only psychotic people and or beings running agendas on us all. And yet again, the positive signs unfolding and are increasing by each show now. Here's another positive change, this time in Sweden, the home of ABBA and the realm of the Rus and one of the Asgards. And Sweden has been doing a lot of right things recently, I've been informed, and the new right-wing government is dismantling the work of the previous socialist government. And they've already scrapped the renewable energy plans and have been pushing for more nuclear power. Now, in the new year, Sweden removed climate taxes on fuel, causing diesel prices to collapse by over 4 SEK per litre. In 2022, when the Socialist Democrats were in power, the diesel price reached a whopping 28 SEK per litre. But after the new government removed climate taxes, prices in the new year reached almost as low as 17 SEK per litre. And that is around 39% lower diesel prices. But further steps have been taken as the previous socialist government included formulations in directives to governmental organisations in Sweden that they had to work towards achieving the Agenda 2030 goals. But the new government has cut the budget to municipalities and regions' cooperation for Agenda 2030. And during the Christmas holidays, they removed the Agenda 2030 goals from the directives to government organisations such as the Swedish Energy Agency, the Swedish Chemicals Agency, the Swedish Agency for Marine and Water Management, and also the Swedish Food Agency, amongst others. Another huge surge in people seeing through these agendas and programs agencies. Now, Bill Gates has donated a whopping 1.27 billion towards funding the UN Agenda 2030 globalist goals, and a large amount of that money is going towards the global digital ID. What a waste of money that will turn out to be. And they said in Sweden this is a major win for the right-wing Swedish Democrats, who are very happy about this move. And generally we don't see any added value with the Agenda 2030 work and welcome the development. Now, during the reign of the Social Democrats and the Green Party, Agenda 2030 and gender equality have been put in place everywhere. And we do not think that is one of the most important tasks for authorities, said Martin Kinnunen, who is an environment and climate spokesperson for the Swedish Democrats. And so there we have it. Sweden has begun to go against the Agenda 2030 global goals. Will anyone else follow? Do you support this move by the Swedish right-wing government? Well, all sane people and governments should support it. And what we are seeing here now is a seismic shift happening around the world on an unprecedented scale. And that is the power of speaking out against these organisations and exposing them. THI, for our role, has planted many of the seeds, and what we are witnessing now is others are growing them. Final piece of news tonight. Here is another seismic shift unfolding. Because these types of bills always passed without question. Well, not no more, it seems, as the House in America failed to pass over $17.6 billion in assistance to Israel on Tuesday. Failed to pass it. And that's a blow to the House Speaker Mike Johnson's attempts to kill the Senate's sweeping bipartisan deal that would tie foreign aid to changes in border and migrant policy. Now, the bill failed by a vote of 250 to 180. And the legislation faced fierce opposition from multiple corners of the lower chamber and required significant bipartisan support as Republican leaders put the bill under suspension, which is a procedural tactic that fast-tracks a bill for a vote but requires 2/3 support to pass it. Well, with the gap of a loss of 70 on the vote, that's going to take quite a turn round. And it said lawmakers on both sides of the aisle have long called for additional aid to Israel. No surprise there, as its war with Hamas rages on in the Middle East. It's not a war with Hamas, it's complete destruction and genocide. But some House Republicans and Democrats, plus some Senate lawmakers, still raise concerns about the latest push. Lawmakers is an interesting term to use, is it not? Where are the policy makers, the solution makers, and the people and country makers? Law is Talmudic, and we no longer need that iron-fisted rule of non-law or justice. Now, the bill may still pass at a later date, but the question of it now is encouraging, and more will have the courage to question the narrative surrounding Israel. Good stuff. And yes, all we need is just a little patience. You know, some people, not many, but some are worried about the blueprints not having its impact. It is. That news section says it all, and it just requires patience. We've planted the seeds, and we show patience to wait for them to grow. But it's grown massively. That's one of the biggest news sections ever. Defund Davos, the World Economic Forum, etc., etc. Agenda 2030, all in one news section. And so that's all we need. Just a little patience. And some medical news now. It's now coming to light what we revealed in the Expose series and also the Cosmic Genetics series, following a report by Tucker Carlson and the Florida Surgeon General Joseph Lombardo. Now, Joseph has stated and raised concerns to the FDA and the CDC, Clown Disease Corporation, which was predictably met with silence. And what he stated was that the jabs contain foreign DNA and other contaminants harmful to the receiver. And this is an overview, is what I've said all along, that the Jewish allied group trying to eliminate and or infect the white race with their malfeasance. Just like the Black Plague, AIDS, H1N1, Ebola and many others all came from these doctors of death. Now it'll be interesting to confirm whose DNA are they using. I suspect it will be from the sub-grey race. And people may ask, why would I say just the white race infection? Because those were the countries that were targeted with the COVID in the main, remember. And what the outcome of this is anyone's guess. But remember, people made their own free will choice. And what it also reveals is their desperation to turn the tide back in their favour. That they would go to such ridiculous lengths to implement this. And it shows they are losing, and losing badly. I did state COVID would have a silver lining to it. It's beginning to come to pass. Not negating the sadness of people passing. If you're one of those people who love to wake up early and go to bed early, there's 3 of them in the village, just saying. In that case, you may have inherited this trait from your Neanderthal ancestors, according to a new study published in the journal Genome Biology and Evolution. And a study conducted by researchers from Oxford University Press reveals that some genetic variants from Neanderthals may have influenced the circadian rhythms of modern humans, making them more adapted to the high latitude environments of Eurasia. But the key is develop your own body clock, particularly for those who are retired or working from home, because it's easier. And sleeping or napping when tired is essential to our own growth. But that is dictated by your own body, not their C-lock clock system. The greed of the medical industry is laid bare in this piece. The group known as Pfizer, or Pfizer, has posted a reported net loss of $2.38 billion in just the third quarter of 2023, compared to a net income of $8.61 billion during the same quarter the previous year. Now, for the quarter ended October the 1st, 2023, the company reported a diluted loss per share of 42 cents. And revenues also saw a decline of 42% to $13.23 billion from $22.63 billion in the same quarter of the previous year. Now, Pfizer attributed the fall in revenues to the expected decline in global revenue generated by the COVID-19 products, Paxlovid and Comirnaty. Now, they both saw revenues fall 97 and 70% drop, respectively, against the same quarter of 2022. Now, excluding Comirnaty and Paxlovid contributions, Pfizer's revenues rose by 10%, or $1.1 billion on an operational basis. And yet, despite the decline, they still recorded $13.23 billion in sales in a quarter. That is a high for a multi-year, never mind a quarter. And the prophets of doom making vast profits of people's sickness is a blight upon society in general. Our blueprint solution reduces those profits to a maximum of 10 to 15%, because everything else is just sheer greed. Society section. More ridiculous woke ideology coming out of schools, as a Seattle high school teacher has been accused of berating a student for describing himself as straight. And this is what you send your children to school for. Saying that it's offensive because it suggests that LGBTQ people must be crooked. Now, the only thing that is crooked is their stupid-ass thinking patterns. And the unidentified pupil's mum filed a formal complaint about Ian Golash, the chair of the Social Studies Department at the Chief South International High School. And she claimed that in the beginning of the school year, Golash provided students, listen closely to this, Golash provided students with a social identity wheel worksheet, and then asking them to reflect on various identities, including race, ethnicity, gender, and sexual orientation. Does anyone ask, why is that relevant in schools? Can people not see what race, ethnicity, and gender are anymore? And why should children have to state it? Is it saying that the teachers are too stupid to see it for themselves? And as for sexual orientation, That is a complete invasion of privacy. Period. All the classes should have given the teachers a social identity wheel as well and see how they would like that. Now, after her son labelled himself as straight, Golash allegedly told the boy the term is offensive. It is completely inappropriate to dictate what terms a student can and cannot use to identify themselves with, she wrote. Correct. Now, Golash denied singling out her son, confirmed saying that he prefers to not use the term straight. Well, that's his problem, because it implies that to not be straight is to be crooked, which could have a negative connotation. Well, everything has a negative connotation with these people, who clearly have far too much time on their hands to come up with this shit, instead of doing what they are actually paid to do and teach the children. Preferably something of value and not pro-pagan da. But the rise of politics and social engineering in sports is also getting beyond a joke now. And modelled on the American schooling system, it seems, where no longer a person's talent or skills are the prerequisite, but what colour or gender you are. And this is called the Diversity Code and is being applied to UK soccer associations. And in signing up, the clubs agree that 15% of new executive appointments and team operation appointments will be from a black, Asian or of mixed heritage background, with 30% of them being female. 25% of new coaching appointments will be black, Asian or of mixed heritage, and 10% of senior coaching appointments. 50% of new coaching appointments at women's football clubs will be female, with 15% of them being black, Asian or mixed heritage. Shortlists for interviews will have at least one male and one female candidate of black, Asian or mixed heritage, provided applicants meet the job specifications apply. And between the 1st of August 2022 and July 31st 2023, the clubs collectively failed to meet any of those recruitment targets, which is not realistic, though some individual clubs did. And when combined, the FA, Premier League and EFL, only one target was fully met, with more than 30% of new team operations appointments being female. And what the majority of coloured or gender people don't get is, by being apportioned a position purely based upon their colour or gender is devaluing them as a person. That is the overview of that programme, because people will look at you and think you only got that position based upon your colour or gender. Do you not realise how devaluing that is? And the reason I say people think that and not say it is due to another programme designed to lead to division, political correctness. But if only politics and politicians operated with correctness, the world would be a better place. People are now seeing through the indoctrination programme called social media, as hundreds of families are now suing some of the world's biggest technology companies who they say knowingly expose children to harmful products. And one plaintiff explains why they are taking on the might of Silicon Valley. I was literally trapped by addiction at age 12 and I did not get my life back for all of my teenage years. And Taylor Little's addiction was social media. an addiction that led to suicide attempts and years of depression. Now, Taylor, who is now 21 and uses the pronoun they, describes the tech companies as big bad monsters. And most people will not recognise this as an addiction because they relate it only to drinks, food or drugs. But like fear, it is more subtle or hidden addiction. How can everyone stare at a phone wherever they go or are and it not be an addiction? It's all about the observation. Now, the companies, Taylor believes, knowingly put into children's hands highly addictive and damaging products, which is why Taylor and hundreds of other American families are suing 4 of the biggest tech companies in the world. And they say it encourages competitive and comparative traits. And it also uses glitzy graphics and surveys to profile you as a person and goes into the vast data mining databases of people who use it to manipulate you. It encourages people to focus on what other people do, say or think instead of themselves. And it encourages people to spy on each other, create drama and gossip that is so toxic to us all. And very few have used social media for the right purposes, which becomes indicative. In an overview, we originally had Facebook and then MeWe to bring down their tools of addiction, control and subjugation of the people. And remember, the social media platforms were developed by DARPA, an insidious group that has never produced anything that was beneficial to the people. And predictably, they gave it to a Jewish person to operate, Zuckerberg with a silent F. Here's another program that is exploding in their faces as Texas gets tough and lays down their law in a big FU to Washington. And whilst facing one of the most pernicious ever threats to American security, recently saw the Texas Governor Greg Abbott invoke Article 1, Section 10 of the United States Constitution to protect his state against the invasion unleashed by Biden. It is an invasion of military-aged male foreigners, causing 51 counties in Texas to issue emergency disaster declarations, and the Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton declared his state won't comply with any orders issued by the socialist Biden regime, which was a declaration of defiance against socialist Democrats, responded to by demanding the socialist leader Biden seize the Texas National Guard. Now, the Texas National Guard is part of the Texas Militia, which also contains the much more powerful Texas State Guard, which is known the governor of Texas has sole control of the Texas State Guard because it's not subject to federal activation. Now, they just released legal analysis article, Governor Abbott is right. Texas has the right to defend itself and secure its border assessed. The constitutional crisis that's been building at the southern border reached a sharp point last Wednesday, when the Texas Governor Greg Abbott asserted his state's right to defend itself against invasion, arguing that the Biden administration had broken the compact between the United States and the states. And it's not an overstatement to say this is the worst constitutional crisis since the Civil War, and that we're in uncharted waters now. There have been times in our history when a state has defied the enforcement of federal laws, but we've never faced a situation where the federal government has refused to enforce its laws and even violated them. And because of the border crisis involves the question of security, Abbott's assertion of state authority cuts right to the heart of the question at hand, which is one of the first principles. Does a polity have the right to defend itself, to preserve its existence in the face of invasion? The answer is, of course, yes. The preservation of the polity must come before process arguments about whose job it is to enforce federal immigration laws. Now, the state of Texas in this case has the authority that transcends that of President Biden and also the Supreme Court. And that's precisely why the US Constitution includes a clause explicitly recognizing a state's right to act in self-defense when faced with invasion. Now, following America's most trusted and popular newsman Tucker Carlson posting the message, so it's unanimous. Everyone in power, from the White House to the hedge fund managers to the Supreme Court of the United States, has decided to destroy the country by allowing it to be invaded. That leaves the population to defend itself. Where are the men of Texas? Why aren't they protecting their state and the nation? Now, the report concludes that independent presidential candidate Robert Kennedy Jr., whose uncle President John Kennedy and father Robert Kennedy Sr. were assassinated by the American government, posted the message, "Texas is right. Biden's failure to secure the border leaves states no choice but to take matters into their own hands." Donald Trump then issued the rallying proclamation. "We encourage all willing states to deploy their guards to Texas to prevent the entry of illegals and to remove them back across the border." Now, a rallying cry, that particular rallying cry from Texas, was heeded by half of the American states, issuing proclamations to defend the state of Texas. Oh my. Now, the Texas Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick threateningly declared, "Sending federal agents to confront the Texas National Guard on the Mexican border would be the biggest mistake the Biden administration could make." Throwing down the gauntlet. Will Texas eventually succeed? Time will tell. In overview, all states should succeed, as none appear to really know what they are connected to. We need American states, not US or U.S. states, as they are the connection to the crown and the elites' ownership of the country. I guess it's all unfolding now. Right, we're going into the expose now. And this is part 2 of the expose from the last THI show, all about the machinations and the politics of the military, government and agencies here and elsewhere, none of which took into account the benefits of it all for the people. Why? Because none of it was for the people. They were mere pawns and batteries within the non-thinking psychopathic clowns who operated within this system of total control. Now, the second page of American intelligence, the deep state is born. And from the moment Kiss My Assenger assumed the post of National Security Advisor to Nixon, he set out to centralize all intelligence estimates, diplomatic initiatives and covert operations over figuratively and sometimes literally dead bodies of the members of the CIA, Joint Chiefs of Staff, the State Department and Congress. Is that not an actual coup of America? And yet where was the dissent against it? Well, none came, as those in those positions were leveraged with previous poor behaviour and the people themselves lacked personal responsibility. But according to John Ranelagh in his book The Agency, The Rise and Decline of the CIA, very early in the Nixon administration it became clear that the president wanted Henry Kissinger to run intelligence, that's a laugh, for him. He had none. And that the NSC staff in the White House under Kissinger would control the intelligence community. Alongside the clown, who had been running the agency for over a decade by then, Bush Sr. And they say this was the beginning of a shift of power away from the CIA to a new centre, the growing NSC staff. And Kissinger would use the Watergate scandal, where the CIA was caught by Congress of directly being implicated in treasonous activities, as the impetus needed to form a new CIA, which was a secret branch away from the scrutiny of Congress. And again, how was that even allowed? Again, that is an overthrow of the government in essence. Now in 1978, Kissinger would launch the Intelligence Reorganization and Reform Act, which essentially worked to clean house of the intelligence community. Their version of clean house is not our version. Think of it in terms of faction fighting and you begin to understand it. And in 1982, under the direction of Kissinger, President Reagan would sign NSDD 77 under Cold War duress, which would launch Project Democracy, which is a sardonic name for a Trojan horse. Trojan horse is any malware that misleads users of its true intent by disguising itself as a standard program. A perfect description. Now, NSDD 77 allowed Project Democracy the reins over covert action on a broad scale, as well as overt public actions later to be associated with the National Endowment for Democracy, NED. Now, the directive ordered the CIA to stay out of both the overt and covert part of Project Democracy, thus giving free rein to the Kissinger NSC apparatus. Almost 1 year later, the uninformed and naive Congress passed the NED Act in October of 1983 and effectively signed off on wrapping duct tape around their heads. I guess they haven't removed them since. Now, the structure of the NED essentially functions as a private CIA political operations arm of an invisible secret government beyond accountability and beyond the reach of law. This is where the contractors come in. And that is exactly as we have described it and why it needs to be shut down along with all other agencies, and then reboot it with carefully selected members into 3 agencies: domestic, foreign and cyber. Now, those who still had a degree of humanity as members of the intelligence community and had survived the Kissinger purge were simply kept in the dark about the cloak and dagger operations of this secret government branch. As for the Department 1, which we mentioned in Part 1, they would be disbanded in 1973, the year Kissinger became Secretary of State and replaced with a group of experts that would later form the National Intelligence Council in 1979. Now, the word experts was more of an assumption back then. Now we are seeing experts for what they are: jackasses. And this would be the last page of sane patriotic leadership within the intelligence community, and was left to the hyenas and jackals to run from thenceforth. Now, David Ignatius, reliable representative voice of the US intelligence apparatus in the Kissinger era, would in September 1991, which was the year of the dissolution of the Soviet Union, would write in the Washington Post an article titled "Innocence Abroad, a New World of Spyless Coups." And the great democratic revolution that has swept the globe over the past few years has been a triumph of overt action, he said. The CIA old boys spent a generation fantasizing about this sort of global anti-communist push. But when it finally happened, it was in the open. Working in broad daylight, the United States and its allies were able to do things that would be unthinkably dangerous had they been done in the shadows. And preparing the ground for the month's triumph of overt action was a network of overt operatives who during the last 10 years have been quietly changing the rules of international politics. And they've been doing in public what the CIA used to do in private. The old concept of covert action, which has gotten the agency into such trouble during the past 40 years, may be obsolete, he said. So why are they now in the open and not hidden is the great pondering for listeners. And I have no doubt some of you will get it straight away. Are they in the open now because they think nobody will do anything about it? Which is a safe assumption based upon people's inability to make these organisations personally responsible, or is it something else? Or could it be that the day of the Svarog reveals the all in the light of day? Nowadays, sensible activities to support America's friends abroad or undermine its enemies, the undermining of friends as well, are probably best done openly. And that includes paramilitary operations such as supporting freedom fighters, like the white helmets, aka penises, which can be managed overtly by the Pentagon. Really. Pentagon and freedom are not two dancing partners that have ever come to the fore. They only dance in the theatres of war and oppression. And it includes political support operations for pro-democracy activists, which may be best left to the new network of overt operators. Now, the covert action boys were known back then as the Office of Policy Coordination, and it may be time at last to bid them adieu. They're obsolete. They've been privatised, largely with technology and mercenary types. And that's especially true in the realm of what used to be called propaganda and can now simply be called information. But it's funny that propaganda is now becoming obsolete as well. Why? Because the people exposed it too much. That's how it works. It reduces the energy. Now, Frank Wisner, the head of CIA covert operations during the mid-1950s, once remarked that he could play the media assets like a mighty Wurlitzer. And said, the article said, today, the mighty Wurlitzer actually exists. It's called CNN. Now, isn't that an interesting reveal? Clown News Network, the blight on all true Americans. Now, Wisner died by suicide in 1965, which is a classic CIA tactic. Alan Weinstein is probably the dean of the new overt operatives. Of course he is. Why? Because he's Jewish. And that won't be the only name who is Jewish that will crop up, as you'll find out. And like many of the people running the new nations of Eastern Europe, they're not new, they're all Russian. He's an ex-professor and even worked for several months writing editorials for the Washington Post. And so there we have it, university and media combined together, just as the From His Story to Our Story series linked them two bodies together. But now with the KGB in retreat from Prague to Vladivostok, they're not, they're still part of the CIA. Weinstein has scheduled a conference in Sofia, Bulgaria on the topic, the proper role of intelligence agencies in a democracy. Except there is no democracy. Only the iron fist rule under these agencies of doom and death. And he said a lot of what we do today was done covertly 25 years ago by the CIA. And the biggest difference is that when such activities are done overtly, the flap potential is close to zero. Openness has its own protection, they say. Well, they can delude themselves with that type of thinking, and don't let it or them delude you. The dark prospers more easily in the dark and the hidden hand. And now they are being forced to operate within the light, and that leads to more exposures, plus more people's awareness, and subsequently it all collapses from within, which is what's unfolding. Now, Alan Weinstein is just one of many overt operatives who helped prepare the way for the so-called political miracles of the past 2 years. And it's worth naming a few more of them to show the breadth of this movement for democracy. William Miller of the American Committee of US-Soviet Relations, George Soros, who's now dead, of the Soros Foundation, which still lives, John Moroz of the Center for East-West Security Studies, John Baker of the Atlantic Council, think tank clowns, Harriet Crosby of the Institute for Soviet-American Relations. But I thought we had told that there is no Soviet-American relations because there's a Cold War and then a hidden Cold War. How can we have groups that have Soviet-American relations where they don't speak to each other? You do realise that Biden has never spoken to Putin once since he got in. So why do we have Soviet-American relations groups? And the article said this has truly been a revolution by committee. The AFL-CIO also deserves a healthy pat on the back. No, they deserve a slap upside the head with a 2x4. And this is what's wrong with this world. We praise psychopathy, because this world is truly a lunatic asylum. Now, working mostly in the open, it helped keep the Polish trade union Solidarity alive in the dark days of martial law during the early 1980s. As the AFL-CIO's Adrian Karatnicki wrote 2 years ago, American trade unions and the US Congress provided millions of dollars to the Solidarity underground. And the sugar daddy of overt operations has been the National Endowment for Democracy, a quasi-private group headed by Carl Gershman, plus Weinstein, that is funded by the US Congress with our money. Did we ask for it? Now, Carl Gershman, it will come as no surprise, is Jewish and born in New York. And it's always Jews at the head of every organisation that is working against the people. And people can complain about that fact that I presented. Personally, I don't care, as it's the truth. Now, through the late 1980s, it did openly what had once been unspeakably covert. The endowment has also been active inside the Soviet Union. It has given money to the Soviet trade unions, to the liberal inter-regional group in the Congress of the People's Deputies, to a foundation headed by the Russian activist Ilya Zaslavsky. Except Zaslavsky is not Russian, he's Jewish as well. They gave money to an oral history project headed by a Soviet historian Yuri Afanasyev, who's also Jewish, and also to the Ukrainian independence movement known as Rucha, and many other projects. And covert funding for these groups would have been the kiss of death if discovered. Overt funding, it would seem, has been a kiss of life. No, it's not, as that applied prior to 2020 when all could be hidden in plain sight. But people are researching more since then and finding this stuff out. Look at the details of the research on COVID alone. People digging into people, organisations and files everywhere, and now connecting the dots. And this puts a new spin on the Washington Post slogan, "Democracy dies in darkness, overt darkness that is." Now, Weinstein, a former Trotskyist, another Jew, not Russian, is the founder of the National Endowment for Democracy along with Carl Gershman. But the real crisis of democracy started with the Trilateral Commission, which was founded in the wake of Watergate and the oil crisis of 1973. And it was formed under the pretense of addressing the crisis of democracy and calling for a reshaping of political systems in order to form a more stable international order and cooperative relations among regions. See how they use other crises in order to formulate a new plan and or agenda? This is the problem, reaction and solution in full flow, a Hegelian dialect based upon confusion and distraction to formulate their preconceived plans. Now, to form an international order was the key component of that. And since when have these clowns ever tried to be cooperative relations with anything or anyone? Now, its formation would be organised by Britain's hand in America, the Council on Foreign Relations, which is the offspring of the Royal Institute for International Affairs, the leading think tank for the British Crown. And Project Democracy would originate out of a Trilateral Commission meeting in May 31st, 1975 in Kyoto, Japan, where the Trilateral Commission's task force on the governability of democracies findings were all delivered. Now, the project was overseen by the Trilateral Commission Director, Zbigniew Brzezinski, and its members James Schlesinger, who was a former CIA director, and Samuel P. Huntington. Well, Brzezinski is Jewish. James Schlesinger, born in New York, and born to Jewish parents. Huntington, born in New York of unknown parentages, but has that distinct Jewish look. They are always involved in everything that is wrong on this planet. Masters of deceit, parasitic in nature, and total control freaks. But it would mark the beginning of the end, introducing the policy, or more aptly, ideology, for the need to instigate a controlled disintegration of society. So that's why the Trilateral Commission was created, to controlled disintegration of society. Now, the Trilateral Commission is a non-governmental body, yet again, under no control. Its members include elected and non-elected officials scattered throughout the world, ironically coming together to discuss how to address the crisis of democracy in the most undemocratic process possible. And it's an organisation meant to uphold the interests of its members, regardless of who the people voted in. And you see, by the 1970s, democracy was obviously broken, and someone had to put things back in order, right? Order out of chaos again, you see, with the Jewish elites always running the show. And this elite grouping of people decided that this approach would be the best for all democracies, and just like that, it was brought into official policy across the Western Hemisphere. Yet again, the predominantly white countries. Now, on November the 9th, 1978, the Trilateral Commission member Paul Volcker, the Federal Reserve Chairman from 1979 to 1987, would affirm at a lecture delivered at Warwick University in England, a controlled disintegration in the world economy is a legitimate object for the 1980s. Volcker is also Jewish. And it also confirms the Federal Reserve deliberately crashes and burns countries' economies with their greedy and self-serving policies. And this was also the ideology that has shaped Milton Friedman's shock therapy. Friedman, born in New York, born to Jewish parents. How obvious can this get before people see who is the problem here? And by the time of Jimmy Carter's administration, the majority of the government was being run by the members of the Trilateral Commission. But who runs the Trilateral Commission? Well, keep in mind that this whole operation was run as an open conspiracy. In May 1981, Henry Kissinger, who replaced Brzezinski at the head of the Trilateral Commission, one Jew replacing another, gave a speech at Chatham House describing his term as the Secretary of State. And he said the British became a participant in internal American deliberations to a degree probably never practiced between sovereign nations. Now, to bring clarity to that statement, it was not the British per se, but the British Israelites who participated in controlling America. And in my White House incarnation, then, Kissinger said, what an interesting term he used there. Incarnation. Because that effort has been incarnating everywhere in multiple times. Not no more, he's not. He said, I kept the British Foreign Office better informed and more closely engaged than I did the American department. It was symptomatic. So Kissinger is working as the American Secretary of State, and he's given more information to the British Foreign Office than the American department. And again, nobody said nothing. America has been kept in the dark about things since 1776 in reality. And how Americans haven't worked that out yet is beyond comprehension. Now, in his speech, Kissinger outlined the conflicting ideologies between Churchill and Roosevelt and concluded with his support for the British worldview as the more superior of the two. And the article said, looks like the Churchill loyalists have won. Controlled disintegration and we all fall down. As in 1975, the Council for Foreign Relations launched a public study of global policy titled the 1980s Project. And the general theme was controlled disintegration of the world economy, and the report did not attempt to hide the famine, social chaos and death its policy would bring upon the world's population. And yet the world ignored it, including all the politicians. Because the only thing that needs depopulating on this planet is psychopaths, whether Jewish or otherwise. And the sheer arrogance of these people or beings is off the charts of known levels. And essentially these clowns are playing God with people, deciding their fates and paths. And predictably, it is the anger management type of God that destroys everything in its path, as revealed within their psychotic book called the Bible. Now, the study explained that the world financial and economic system needed a complete overhaul, according to which key sectors such as energy, credit allocation and food will be placed under the direction of a single global administration. And the objectives of this reorganisation would be the replacement of nation states. However, before this could occur, nation states would have to falter, or at least give off the impression of faltering. And the failure of the nation state is not a natural phenomenon, but is the outcome of a fascist coup, involving a banker's dictatorship, economic looting, and permanent warfare. The Cold War never ended, to hinder national industrial growth. Now, the author stated the Cold War never ended, but misses the fact in it never started to begin with. Just another fake program to create fear, bring in policies of a psychotic nature, and to loot countries of their funds. Now, among the most effective strategies towards this end has been the colour revolutions, which just so happens to be the NED's speciality practice and has included, to name but a few, the nations of Yugoslavia, Georgia, Iraq, Lebanon, Burma, Iran, Egypt, Yemen, Ukraine, and the ongoing Hong Kong protests. And wherever this strategy has unfolded, the target state is told by the international community that it has no right to intervene and is told to stand by as its nation is ransacked by locusts and its government reorganised, generally with the support of the CIA again. And with the final purge of American intelligence and the formation of a secret government, rendering anything resembling a democratic process obsolete, unless someone can restart the engine fast, we will soon be confronted by Willy Brandt's prophecy of finding ourselves rudderless under a surrounding sea of dictatorship. Well, that has clearly unfolded, but the blueprint can fix that here and now. Isn't it interesting the amount of these reports of the collapsing nature of the many of the big organisations that were designed for control purposes, not to function as vehicles for the benefit of the people? So a little bit about the author. Cynthia Chung is the president of the Rising Tide Foundation and is the author of the book, The Empire on Which the Black Sun Never Set. What an interesting title that is, as we hardly ever hear outside of THI the mention of the Black Sun at all. Now, the book was written in 2022, and so was after the 8C episode of From His Story to Our Story, and also after the takeover of the Fed by BlackRock, which is Black Sun, ably supported by Trump and the money from the trustee. But the Russians are coming, the intelligence and military agencies have said from the 1950s onwards. And like most of their intelligence reports, it never comes to fruition, does it? 74 years on, the Russians never came, but still the child-level goons in those agencies pushed the same narrative. Why? Because Britain and America in particular are run by the Jewish elites determined to cause the destruction of us both. Remember, this piece started off with the darkened old soul of Kissinger, who is Jewish. And all of our policies are for the benefit of these Jewish elites and not for the people. And that has to change. Some booming pieces tonight. And we're at the end where most people's favourite lies. I wonder what we have tonight. Anyway, we're going to start off with the From His Story to Our Story section, and this piece is interesting from our series From His Story to Our Story perspective, and a further sign of the impact the book and THI is having upon the collective consciousness. And also shows the spin masters of lies of how they operate to distort the truth and create agendas surrounding the narrative. But Donald Trump said recently that undocumented immigrants were poisoning the blood of our country, and repeating language that has previously drawn criticism as xenophobic and echoing of Nazi rhetoric. And yet again mention anything white related and out comes the negative labels. Criticise anything Jewish and out comes the anti-Semitic label. All so predictable. But Trump made the comments during the campaign event in New Hampshire, where he railed against the record number of migrants attempting to cross the US border illegally. And Trump has promised to crack down on illegal immigration. Well, he didn't in the 4 years that he was in, well, not too much anyway, and restrict legal immigration if elected to a second 4-year term in office. They're poisoning the blood of our country, Trump told a rally in the city of Durham, and adding that immigrants were coming to the US from Asia and Africa, in addition to South America. All over the world they are pouring into our country. Now, Trump had used the same poison in the blood language during an interview with the National Pulse, which is said to be a right-leaning website that was published in late September. They'll say right because it's linked with Nazism, you see. And it prompted a rebuke from the Anti-Defamation League, well, I never, whose leader, Jonathan Greenblatt, Jewish, called the language racist, xenophobic and despicable. Why would the Jewish feel they have to pass comment on it at all? They were not included in the speech. Does that make it indicative who runs that program? He mentioned Asia, Africa and South America. Not Jewish. But the reason being is, in my opinion, it is they, the Jewish, who told them to say it. So they can then carry on their white supremacist rhetoric and discourage others in questioning the immigrants coming in or the motive. Jason Stanley, a Yale professor and author of a book on fascism, said Trump's repeated use of that language was dangerous, except it's not. And he said Trump's words echoed the rhetoric of the Nazi leader Adolf Hitler, who warned against German blood being poisoned by Jews in his political treatise Mein Kampf. All too predictable. Follow or support a predominantly white country and you get labelled as Hitler. Multiculturalism means to trample all over the whites, as no other traditional non-white country has to put up with this. But what is of interest is it is being covered in the mainstream media. Now, the topics that were brought up in the book and series continues to permeate the airwaves, like this story as well. As the French President Emmanuel Macron has come off the fence, it says, and opened the way for policies that are unmistakably on the political right. See how they throw the right in? Because right is linked with Nazism, you see. And that is the unanimous verdict after he gave a long televised press conference on recently. He promoted uniforms in schools, a crackdown on drug gangs, which is interesting, and steps to boost France's declining birth rate. Oh my. Yet another country realising their previous policies have failed and now trying to address the imbalance before the country's economy collapses. And it's completely Ouroboros policies again. Now, the article said left-wing commentators deplored his apparent shift from the crafted political balance of recent years. But they said they suspected all along the right was where his heart lay. And it's sheer lunacy, this left and right Thothian bird-paced political thinking. And it is an opinion, but why does it have to be a stupid label? Lunatic asylum, anyone? But the president's most overt lift from the Conservative playbook was a promise of more natalist policies to counteract France's falling birth rate. And in 2023, fewer than 700,000 babies were born for the first time since World War II. Funny, it was all working fine when the trust was open. But when M pulled it, reality has dawned on the main countries that they will not be sustainable, just like this show forecasted 7 or 8 years ago. In fact, in Cosmic Voice also. And it's all just as the Jewish elites planned it, except it's backfiring on them now as well. Oops. This piece came up recently, and we are not aware or sure of its authenticity. But having watched briefly some of the text from the interview of Putin and Tucker Carlson today, I think it is him. But the message itself certainly resonates with THI and from his story to our story themes, and in particular the Ers and the Santis. Vladimir Putin's letter to the world: Dear inhabitants of our beautiful planet Earth, I, the President of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin, decided to address all of you directly, bypassing diplomats, your leaders and journalists. In Russia, there is a so-called Ural exchange, where it's forbidden to lie, deceive and exaggerate. Al is a tip to the Ers. And he said, therefore I will speak very honestly so that everyone will be convinced of the truth of my words. Russia is a big and rich country. Its most important value is more than the 150 million people who live in a territory where justice is above all. We don't need new territories. We have energy and all other resources are abundant. And that is correct, as Russia is by and large self-sufficient, something the globalists and agency goons don't particularly like. And since the time of the great Tatar and the great Mughals, the peoples of northern Eurasia have not developed because of the onslaught of the Crusades and the colonization of America, Africa, India, or the drug addiction of China, but because of their hard work and pacifism. Anyone who knows Russian understands that Russian is an adjective that refers to all the peoples of our country. Russian Slavs, Russian Tatars, Russian Jews, Russian Evans, etc. Evans or Evens are nomadic people in the Far East region of Russia near Siberia. All Russian at heart, even if their culture, language or way of life differ, and we honour this diversity of unity. The Russian people are once again forced to sacrifice their lives to protect the world from Nazism and fascism. We exchanged 50 of our prisoners of war for 50 Ukrainian soldiers. The Ukrainian soldiers were treated in our hospitals, given 3 full meals a day and returned home. We received Russian soldiers who had their fingers and genitals cut off. Not even the Nazis did that in the last war. That is a common CIA tactic. Take note. And he said, we will present this evidence in a future process, and shame on everyone who supports these scumbags now. Your leaders in the US, Europe, Japan, Australia and elsewhere have sided with these subhumans who put civilians, pregnant women and children above themselves in combat and deliberately want prisoners of war. Subhuman is an interesting term he used there. And he said, I can't imagine any sane person supporting these monsters, and your Bidens, Scholz, Macron and other dark Democrats not only protect criminals, but actively arm them, provide them with money that is not enough to lower prices in your countries. Prices are rising, the world is collapsing. Indeed. But not because the Russians are cleansing Europe of Nazi evil spirits, but because you are silent and even support the new wave of Nazism, which, as our members know, is Zionism. It's got zero to do with Germany and everything to do with Jewish, or those that go by the name of being Jewish. This time we will not go to Berlin. We will stop at our historical borders and all the Nazi evil spirits. Interesting terminology that your leaders open the door to will give you a new crystal life, as the Nazis did, adding circumcision to the reproductive organs to it. A new crystal life has deep significance also. And he said, I want to appeal to all who want to live and work in the world, raise children and socialise with people all over the world. Help Russia fight the new cancer, Ukrainian Nazism. Not Ukraine, where peaceful and hard-working people live, but Nazism fueled by your US taxes and NATO hawks. If your leaders support Nazism, push them over the edge, take power into your hands. Ukrainian Nazis are protected from bullets by civilians. Your rulers also decided to transfer the burden of high prices and future troubles to the population under the pretext of terrible Russia. In Ukraine, just like you, the Nazis live well behind the backs of ordinary citizens, and ordinary citizens have to suffer, and these are the same crimes in Ukraine as in the West. We have not broken any of our promises, and your leaders have stolen $300 billion and euros from the Russian people. They steal the property of our country's citizens all over the world. You deliberately want our soldiers, ban the Russian language and attack the Church of God. I see that in countries where leaders are tightening sanctions against Russia, there's a growing awareness of what is happening and a wave of protests is spreading. Interesting piece, and one hopes telling of our story, which is also their story, will ease their pain, concerns and malignment. To then come together as one and take back this world from the dark forces, once and for all. The whole world is watching. They're seeing and acting now. What a show. And we still got the favourite part to come. Mystery section. Last week we asked, is this planet a lunatic asylum? The first topic was religion, and for good reason. As when done in overview, it makes no sense whatsoever. And I asked the question of, why do people go to church but never develop themselves? The answer is they don't. As there is zero evidence globally of being attached to religion makes you into a better person. And it's like when I said 5 years ago on a show, there's not enough nice people. And particularly some were triggered by that, but they were triggered because they know it was true, but were not ready to face that harsh reality just yet. And there have been many examples of statements from this show that you have all had to swallow the uncomfortable truth pill. This is a reality show, not an illusionary roadshow. But this was written by a religious person and is yet again another example of non-thinking before speaking or writing. A completely delusional thought process that is highly prevalent in religious settings. And he said, the moon has been given a huge importance and significance in our religion because the moon shines the light at night when we need it. Not like the sun, which shines at the day. Who needs the light at daytime? Once again, it is proved that our religion is the most intelligent one. Maulana Khan, a Muslim. Who needs light at daytime? Seriously. It's mind-boggling. And it furthers the notion of the lunatic asylum here. And this is why the What Is series we did at the end of the Blueprint shows is so important going forward. People have to learn to understand what they're actually saying and thinking, and more importantly, understand what is life, love and living. Who needs the light at daytime? McFly. Jackass. That's why it's called lunacy. Lunar. Moonsea. This was written by a member and a poignant reminder to us all to learn to embrace life with nature, not just as an observer. And it said, imagine a seed that can grow into a beautiful flower. Some may watch, lack, or be not familiar with this kind of radiance. As the gardener went missing, trials arose to tear, give commands or promises, but even with the flower's will, the light started to dim. The cycle repeats with jealousy, resentment and endless disputes as to who it would belong to, with the floral family forced to pretend and compete. Maybe as the first part is told, hope will recollect, a nurtured flower blooming, enriching the face of its friend within whom it grows. And along with the newly created species, restore the counterweight path once trodden. I hope that you got all that pondering on a deeper level. Life is way deeper than just scratching the surface once you dare to look. The old adage of you can't teach the stupid, and you can't teach the desperate either, following this hilarious piece. As scientists have submitted proposals for a new $17 billion atom smasher to help solve the mysteries of the universe. Really. Called the Future Circular Collider, FCC, and it'll be a 56.5 mile circular tunnel buried deep underground at the Swiss-French border. FCC stands for effing circus clowns, just saying. And it will be capable of accelerating particles to almost the speed of light before crashing them into each other, possibly shedding light on the mysterious dark matter and dark energy that make up 95% of the universe. And the FCC, effing circus clowns, proposed by the European Organisation for Nuclear Research, CERN, will be triple the size of the 16.6 mile large Hadron Collider at the same site. The Higgs boson, also known as the God particle, was first detected there in 2012. No, because the God particle is us, not the Higgs boson. But keep going. Now, unlike that machine, which is buried 260 foot deep, the new one will have to go 650 foot underground. You can run, but you can't hide, to prevent harmful radiation from reaching the surface, they said. All of which means these clown-based machines leak radiation into the subsoil. Why aren't the people of Switzerland and France complaining about this ecological disaster? Now, Professor Fabioli Gianotti, who is the Director General of CERN, said, "We need a large collider because there are so many outstanding questions in fundamental physics today and in our knowledge of the universe." No, the professor needs a large collider on her brain to smash the two brain cells she has together and see if it can produce some common sense. There are only so many outstanding questions in science because you miss the Captain Obvious within science and also the programs of lies. Fabiola Gianotti, Director General of CERN, is Jewish. What a particle smashing surprise that is. Next line. Particle accelerators have also played a role in cancer research. Is that because of the radiation damage it causes? And they generate high-energy protons that precisely target cancer cells without damaging surrounding tissue, help researchers test new drugs and break down DNA to investigate the causes of cancer. To break down DNA was the key part, not the distraction of curing cancer. And the new collider would not be up and running until the 2040s at the earliest. No, it won't. And it would be funded by CERN's 23 member states, including the UK. What this all reveals is, despite our claims that it no longer worked since August 2014-15, and their claims that it was all still working well. Guess what? It wasn't. And so the jackasses will try to build a new one. And guess what? That won't work as well. And that's a promise. CERN is a con, but don't be concerned about it. Message to the clowns. How are you going to replace the non-corporeal ninjas? Just saying. And when this doesn't work, will you build a newer one? Because then you will have your own private, non-working, three-ring circus. Here is another example of their desperation and attempting to use technology to stop the flow. Guess what? This won't work either. Climate scientists are developing an umbrella-like shade the size of Argentina that would block the sun's rays to mitigate the effects of global warming on Earth. Is it climate or primate scientists? because they're certainly lacking the thinking skills of humans. Well, guess who wants to implement this harebrained idea? The wild idea comes from Israeli researchers who believed the 1 million square mile shade could reduce the Earth's temperature by 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit within 2 years. What does that tell you again? Have the Israelis ever done anything for anyone's benefit? Are they trying to terraform the planet for their species? Guess what? That won't work either. Now, the team at Technion Israel Institute of Technology is seeking up to $20 million for a prototype 100 square feet, which they said could be achieved by 2027. Message to the clowns. You couldn't dim the sun with your Rahu eclipse. What makes you think this'll work? Lunacy from the moon cult strikes again. Just give up. You've lost. Some poetic ponderings with songlines coming up now, born out of my break time, and I hope you enjoy them. But life has become about parroting on this planet, which in overview is an echo. It's an echo, echo, echo. Just like the sound of a windmill going round, it bristles within the breeze. Like a laugh in the wind, it carries on the breeze and permeates those that touch it. But the breeze is at first the energy. The vibration then comes in to oscillate it, and the energy or motion of the wind creates the sound or frequency, all of which was created by the thought. The stairway may lie on the whispering wind, but it is the thought that counts. But if thoughts are not your own, you become the parrot, vacuum, an echo chamber. But an echo then brings in the vacuum and the chamber. A vacuum sucks up life and energy until your last dying breath. Is not the vacuum your own tomb? Is not the vacuum your own box? Is not the vacuum your energy drainer? Is not the vacuum your own creation? Is that all you can create? People have become their own vacuums, sucking up the life force of others in the non-soul advancement dance of service to self. Like a seaside trader, you sell fish. But the fish rots from the head down, does it not? The selfish rots from within, thinking only their lives matter. But it becomes a tomb that loops within the simulated astral realm. The astral realm is the tomb, the vacuum, and the echo chamber, sucking the life out of everything and never giving back. The real harvesters of sorrow. Why are they harvesters of sorrow? Because they did it to themselves. Cocooned in the vacuum of the self only, consumed by the arrogance of only they are important, forgetting that life is a spiral cycle and what goes around comes around. But isn't what goes around comes around a loop? Which means you are not on the spiral cycle of rebirth, growth and expansion. The Mobius loop is also a vacuum, remember. It has no opening, gate or expansion. And eventually, like the vacuum, it closes in on itself. And that is what service to self has, is and always will be. A vacuum of harvesting. But in harvesting, you reap what you sow. Do you sow the seeds for us all to grow? Or is sow a sow? A pig that consumes everything in front of it? The question then becomes, are you the greedy little piglets Cassandra accused us of? The chamber of the echo rippling within its confined spaces, in overview, is the world's media. They are the echo chamber, parroting away the same words and sentences. But a sentence is also a prison term, is it not? Why jail yourselves within the echo chamber? Everything they say is in the vacuum of life, but the vacuum consumes and ultimately consumes itself and life. The vacuum of space, they say, there is nothing there. Why? Because you forgot to create something, forgot to see something, or forgot to hear something. Who did you forget to hear? You. Where is your vision? Is it mired in their vision for you in another vacuum, the television? You become boxed into the vacuum of their life, opinions and plans for you. They are telling you a vision of their making. If you follow it, you then become their echo chamber. Lost in a sea of illusion, scrabbling around for the crumbs of life they present to you, and yet you gladly tolerate it. The grand illusion, indeed. Final piece tonight. This is a poetic piece laced with lines from various songs that sing to us, yet all too often we ignore. And this is a selection of my ponderings on my trips away recently. I labelled it The Tour of Destiny. As I stood at the precipice of life, rhyme and reasoning, looking down upon the valley of life, I was greeted with some sense of familiarity as the sun peered over the hills and breathed fire and new life into the morning air. Its radiance kissing away the morning dew and mist, almost like a recording of time. Flashbacks into an earlier time and space began to unfold, permeating the thoughts, heart and being. As a blaze of light caressed the new day and the feeling of the light overcoming the dark yet again, a mere candle in the vastness of space, blazing its trail amongst the backdrop of the solar wind. Curiously, that wind never dims or blows the candle out. It doesn't even flicker. It is a reminder of life and its daily machinations we all face. And like the sun, we are reminded that you don't dance within the dark, you shine and ride the wave in a never-ending flow. As time ultimately stands still in the moment, I look back on the horizon and realise I'm coming home. The home is a distant familiarity, like the roar when my team has scored, the roar of the space shuttle, the Arya, a cave on a distant planet, or being amongst the stars. Home is where the heart is, they say, and that much is true. But like heaven, it is also a state of being. Being in the moment, being in the all that ever was, as contentment and raw emotions take centre stage. But on the ultimate stage of life, what role are you playing? Do the stage lights blind you and allow stage fright to overcome you? Or do you embrace those lights and become one with or within it? The choices of life and living are often overlooked within our busy daily lives. A great deflection as you self-contain yourself in an embryonic coat of uncertainty, illusion, and accepted reality. But it's not real. It's someone else's movie and a part created for you. Where is you? Who are you? Are you in the now or tied to some outpost like a tethered horse and echoing the distant past? Are you past or past? Have you passed on? Why is the past familiar? Death does not kiss away the echoes of the past as it sings familiar songs to you as a reminder into the now. The sun rises like the rainbow and it's coming home to your time, your space and your existence, and will do so until my and its dying day. I don't want to spend my whole life in this town. I can feel it driving me away. Maybe it's time to reach for higher ground. You've got to steal away. But how can you steal away on your own planet? As walking the valley can become like the shadow of death, or it can breathe new life as the Valley of Kings. But kings and queens can blind your eyes and steal your dreams, it is said, only if you allow it to. Standing tall and not immersing in the vast ocean of insanity retains the essence of you, providing you hold on to it. But what are you holding on to instead? Why does life ultimately tie me and bind, the proverbial Gordian knot of my and our own making? As the sun came out of the black and into the blue, the clouds like an echo of the mist of time danced all around it, swirling and dancing in front of the light bearer, the torch, the beacon. The beacon is like a lighthouse sitting on the dock of a bay, watching the tide rolling away. Is the tide incoming or outgoing? The question really is, are you incoming or outgoing? Will the tide you over, or create a new sequence of life to wash away the tears and previous moments of erosion at the beachhead of life? Time is but a mere illusion, making you sick of life itself, but a positive thought, memory or appearance erodes that sickness and illusion. Time is always a medical emergency unless you control it and you. I have no time, people say. Yet why can't you fill that no time with something better than what went before? Because you became the tide, rolling in and out whilst eroding yourself away by creating chaos. Chaos becomes a random event, they say. Not if it's the same movie reel playing over and over again, it's not. Life then becomes grave, bogged down by the mud, hampered by the prickly thickets as the river flows beneath your feet. But ambling through that wooded valley gave rise to hope and the chance to reach for higher ground and the overview vantage point. From there, you can feel the vibration around you, oscillating and reaching a crescendo. A realization then dawns upon you. You can become one of the sheep meandering through the valley of mud, or reach for higher ground and be touched by the rays of the sun. Life then becomes the weather barometer. Cold, damp and lonely, or you can be touching the warmth of the sun that echoes within us all. Life is all about choices. Life is what you make it, the song says. But if you choose to make it death, then rest your soul. Life can be wearing in vocal terms, but which where are we saying or referring to? As there are 4 variants of where, and where. Is it a place, a house, something to put on, or a past or future statement? We're always unsure of where we are, as the weather within decides what we wear in or out of the house. Life is but a dream, but who is creating it, them or you? Who is them, you may ask? Who is you, is the reply. Do you fulfill your dreams? Do the dreams fulfill you? Or do your dreams wash away on the tide of life like another missed opportunity? Will you ebb or flow? Will your flower bloom or wilt? Will you embrace the light or disintegrate within the dark and become a void? An endless empty vessel navigating the river Styx, like riding an endless caravan as you were bonded and sold, or sold as a slave. How did or can you become lost when you never found yourself to begin with? As I snap out of this dream within a dream within a dream whilst fulfilling the dream, I'm reminded of that misty morning on the edge of time. We lost the rising sun, the final sign. But the final sign of what? Well, that's your choice as always, your responsibility as well, to create and be something new. Or the shadow of the valley of death embraces you like the children lost of the sea. But in that moment of pain and suffering, the wind of change came tumbling down and washed that desperation and sadness away. All was not lost. It just required a rescue mission of sorts. But who or what was being rescued is always lost by immersion. Not from the panoramic overview hilltop that became home for a day or two, but will last an eternity. I again returned to the thoughts of my dream, with tears in my eyes and emotions sitting heavy upon my soul. I remembered something that plagued my past and one day will take place in my future, of I can hear the sound of a windmill going round. It will always go around, providing you don't stop it or you. Anyone can have a heart, one song says, but not if you've made up your own mind you won't. Tomorrow may belong to me, but it also belongs to us all, even when we all learn to get out of our own way. When we learn to fly, flourish, prosper and love to the best of our abilities, all whilst remembering to support each other. The neglect of each other is also the neglect of the self. Life is a bittersweet symphony, but who is playing and who is conducting the orchestra? You or them? My name is human, we may sing, but have we proven it to ourselves and each other? As what we have here is a failure to communicate. We don't need your civil war. Yet do we not have civil war between our own two hemispheres? War, what is it good for? Absolutely nothing. But then why do we dance in its field within ourselves? Who's got my back now, when all I have left is deceptive, so disconnected? What is the truth now? And then I ponder, what is this life for? Can I take myself higher? And that I have always done. And we all ask, I want to know what love is. Yet do we embrace it when it unfolds, or does it become a rhetorical question? You give love a bad name, the song says. The question is, who does that? The answer is, we all do, until we change us. The change is not going to come within or without. It's the final countdown, but the countdown to what? Only you decide that destiny and path. Until we all learn to I will fix you, we will remain like the lost children of the sea. But the light will always guide you home, ignite your souls, and provide the courage to fix you yourself. The love of life will always light your beacons and keep the darkness at bay. Spread your wings and you will see you control your destiny when all is said and done. Time to set your sails and path, methinks. This has been the Truth, Honour and Integrity Show. My name's Thomas Williams. Bye for now.